It's our second panel discussion of the day. We're in the midst of London Fashion Week. It's been an amazing season already, and we're going to be talking about JW Anderson, so I don't doubt that we're going to be shocked and surprised in some way. I have a fabulous set of panellists with me who will introduce themselves.
Hi Lou,
Hi.
I'm Dilys Williams. I'm the Director at Centre for Sustainable Fashion.
I'm Karl Plewka. I'm a freelance fashion stylist, and excuse the fact I'm losing my voice.
I'm Frances Corner and I'm Head of the London College of Fashion.
I'm Harriet Quick, the Editorial Director of Lux Up.
I know we're here to talk about Jonathan, and I don't want to move away from that too much, but I do just want to ask you, Harriet, tell me about Tom Ford, because you've come straight from there, haven't you?
Amazing setting, the biggest flowers and candles, beautiful amber lighting at Lancaster House. So it could not be more splendid for this kind of runway debut for him. And it was just amazing. It was so opulent, everything worked to kind of couture standards, but still had like hip-hop meets Le Croix, multi-ethnic, beautiful zebra, embroidered dresses. I mean, just amazing. Everything was like 3D and really sensitive. It was lots of fun, you know, like a real sense of humour as well, which was really great.
Amazing. I want to also talk, before we start focusing on Jonathan's women's, a little bit about last season, about the men's. I want to ask what you thought of that, Karl, what you thought of his men's collection.
Oh my God, I just loved it. I loved the reference to Bal de Jour, and the fact it was actually something. You know, it was directed towards men, and it was this sense of kind of uptight sensuality, but with this sort of strange, twisted, feminine bent, and I just think he's. I mean, I'm a huge fan. I have to say, I'll get that out there right now. But and everyone talks about, oh yeah, he's into like, you know, the cross-dressing thing, men, women, or the crossing of codes of, you know, gender and everything. And I just think that doesn't really matter. I just think what he did was incredibly brave, and it always looks really accomplished, and it always looks so well thought out and so precise. And I think that he really is the designer that we have to get behind in this country, because he's out on his own. He has his own voice, and I thought it was so incredible. And I'd murder anybody who said it wasn't a good collection. It was amazing.
Wow, that's strong words indeed. Yeah. But it's interesting that you say anyone that said it wasn't a good collection, because a lot of people, you know, did really go to town on the criticism of that, saying like, on some degree people were saying it wasn't accomplished. You know, a couple of people criticised the cut of it, and on the other hand you had people that did just criticise and say it was just down to shock, and I was surprised it provoked such a reaction.
Well, I mean, really, I see so many shows, like we all do, and I just want to see things that are, you know, obviously, I mean, boring, but I want to see something new and innovative, and he's doing something completely out there, but it's still it's relevant because of the way it's technically amazing, and I believe that creativity only comes from technique. True creativity, and that's what he always seems to, and he's getting better. I think in his early days not so much, but I think every season he just completely streamlines it and nails it even, and it's so sexy what he does as well, and I think he's incredibly sexy. I think he's someone that he could be like a kind of an edgy Tom Ford in a way. I don't know. Would you all do you know what I mean?
Would you all agree with that?
Yeah, I think he's got real heart and soul in it. I think that's what comes through. There's a kind of authenticity somehow. He's not out to shock. He's actually out to do the thing that he really passionately believes in doing, and he does it well. And that really comes through, I think.
He went to LCF once, so you must be very proud.
No, I am very, very proud. I mean, yes, and he's just got such a good eye. I think, I mean, not only is he taking the chances, but he goes to the essence of what it is he's trying to do. And yes, there are always things, you know, you can feel, I mean, we were talking, obviously, the panel last night about Jonathan Saunders and how he spent sort of 10 years in a way developing his voice and really refining what he's doing, and he came up with a very beautiful collection in the sense that, you know, JW's taking the chances, he's experimenting, but he's still able to go to the essence of what it is he's trying to say. I really enjoyed, I didn't see that collection live, but I saw the previous Womenswear and I thought it was stunning. And the way he's playing with materials and putting them together, and you just feel, I mean, I agree, I think he's got a unique voice at the moment, at a time when the industry is tending to go for, particularly London's becoming more sophisticated, and you know, you want people to be taking those sorts of chances, but in a way with clothes that are very wearable, and I think he's really pushing that.
Well, I mean, I think there was some controversy over some of the fabrics he was developing being like almost unnecessary, like you know, the sponge cotton that was like almost looked like neoprene, all that stuff from last season. But you know, the thing is, the most creative people I've ever worked with in my career, photographers, designers, whoever, they go around the houses and they torture themselves to get to where they feel comfortable, and I think that's what he does. He's not just going to go, oh, let's use neoprene, we want that effect. He wants to experiment and he wants to develop, and whether you know Joe Bloggs appreciates it or not doesn't matter. You know, I think he is a very good person at editing his own work, and I think he's obviously very self-disciplined, and it really shows. And I think that's something to be said in a relatively young designer.
And I think doing the Topshop collection that he did as well. I mean, he's really pushing it out, isn't he? Trying how to develop the brand, but in a way that is sort of creative.
Well, he's very conscious of his brand and how that can develop and how he can mediate it in a very sophisticated way, which I think absolutely you need that as a designer in the current arena. You can't hide away. You need to be very agile through all the different aspects of your business. And I think the other thing is, as a designer, he's got an incredible sense of proportion and detail, and that technique is it's the foundation, because that's what delivers.
And you said sophisticated, and I think that is the word that sums him up. You know, not sophisticated cocktail dress, sophisticated, modern, relevant designer.
I think the fact that you said he's agile, I think that's such a true word for him, because as much as I think his collections are brilliant, I am glad you mentioned that kind of the brand side of it, because he is, you know, ruthlessly ambitious in a really refreshing way, because he is so honest about how he wants to build his brand and he wants to get as much attention as possible and use that in a really positive way, because he so strongly believes in what he's doing. And I find that really refreshing, actually, when you speak to a lot of designers where they act like that side doesn't matter. But I think he is very in tune to that.
But I suppose that sense of marketing is so much part of the London College of Fashion training, isn't it?
Well, I think the thing about technique as well, because obviously the way things are constructed, whether you're a photographer or an illustrator or, you know, in making shoes, I mean, that understanding of the technique that's associated with the area you're going in for is what we really work hard at as a college, because without that, I totally agree. It's a bit like expecting a dancer to do an amazing performance when they don't really understand and don't rehearse enough the basic steps. It's exactly the same, whatever creative area you're going into.
I wouldn't want to be on EastEnders and not be able to do Chaucer or Shakespeare.
But he's gutsy with his idea about having this awareness of a brand. He's not actually looking at what other brands do or looking at how business usually works. He's actually creating a new kind of business and a new kind of identity as a designer. And I think he actually takes more risks by doing that, by being aware of the brand, than a lot of the other designers do. And he's got a slight sort of humour in it. He's out there, but he doesn't take it too seriously either.
I think we're about to see some clothes.
But there's not too much humour, thank God.
Not funny.
No, not silly.
But I think it's very British, isn't it? It's funny and
I love the space
as well. The space is
incredible.
Yes,
it's amazing. Please keep
the lighting in the
showing
space is beautiful, and the textures.
And it's great when you're there as well, isn't it? Because you don't. It feels like the atmosphere is really good as well. It's like
it feels raw and luxurious
at the same time.
Raw and chic.
Yes.
What do we think of that as an opening look?
I didn't actually see it.
Looking at the space. Well, it was the same as this, but in black.
Puritanical and sexy at the same time. Look at that thigh slit with those strange morgue shoes.
And I love the way, because I've spoken to him about this, how he does design his collections to look good on the internet. So he does them in these blocks. So when you see them on style.com or on SHOWstudio or on Vogue.com, you see them in that block format. And that's such a pragmatic thing to say that
it's very lovely around the neck as well, the neck with the sides split.
But it also looks amazing on the body. He might be designing it to look good on the screen, but actually on the body,
so what fabric is
that?
That looks like a leather.
Like a lacquered leather, is it? There's a nice sense of mystery, isn't there?
Yes.
And something quite nicely clinical.
Very clinical. I think it's those shoes, it's like nurses.
A surgeon or a mortician's or...
And you know, you never feel like you're looking at anyone else's work.
No.
It's not, it doesn't feel derivative of anything.
But then he does develop a lot. As like you would look at this and go, "This is J.W. Anderson," but then he does always move forward each season, which I think is a really, really fine art.
Because there are references to earlier collections. I also like the tie.
But that's
as well.
nice, like a folded.
But that's the essence of a great design, to be relevant exactly to that time, but also still be timeless. So his collections look really fresh and look as if they're his collections and nobody else's, but they're absolutely to the moment that they're in.
Yeah.
That skirt arrangement is fabulous. That's awesome. He's very interesting because we do a thing at SHOWstudio called Re-See where we go and sit with the designer and they talk about their collection on film at length, and we did one for his menswear that he just did, and he said that it was quite funny actually. It was kind of like when Miuccia Prada's like, oh, it's not Japanese, it was actually, looking at this, and they're completely point blank denying something that everyone else said. But he was like, my men's was about proportion. He was like, it wasn't about shock, it was about where your arms would go, or taking a traditional shape and moving it around. But you do get that sense when you look at the clothes. It is about proportion, not just of the item, but also of the body.
But all the best designers are always dismissive about what they do.
Yeah. But he's not dismissive. He's very proud of it, I think. But he's I don't think he's willing to kind of play the game in that, in the sense of he's happy to have a bit of fun.
We never give too much away, right?
I think its proportions here again.
It's lovely where the pockets are.
And where the length of the tunic is in relation to the trousers, and that in a way the earlier pieces is exactly the same. I think he has got that great eye, which is what we were talking about before.
And that sense of how it sits on the body. You can imagine him actually thinking really about how you move, how you walk, where where those pockets. So he's mixing skill and kind of tradition with some of his tailoring, but actually being really practical about how people live and where they need their pockets.
I mean, you can really see in this why he was so hotly rumoured to take over from Jill Sander. When there was that big musical chairs. Guessing game.
It would have been great.
He would definitely.
But we'll see him at Versus now, which will be really, really exciting.
Yeah, that is very exciting.
So excited
and I think
that.
it's very inspired of Donatella to take
a
very different talent to Christopher and have this sort of rolling roster of great young names.
She has a great eye, doesn't she?
Yeah,
she does.
And she's very supportive.
I mean, this is really excellent, isn't it? These sort of combinations.
It feels quite 90s to me, that trouser
I like all this
shape
Liechtensteiny pop-up prints.
And I like the way he does something so graphic like that. With the men's, he did those circles on the knits, but even that cross, because it is like a type of a thing that will become iconic for that
quite
season.
Erotic as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so
I love that. I love the way it's everything he does is sexy, I think, but it's
and you look at the back of that dress, it turns around, gorgeous.
And also, it's hard. A shoe like that is a hard shoe to give a sense of elegance and sort of sexiness to a silhouette, and it totally. I mean, that shows how great he is at cutting.
Because again, it all comes back to the proportion and the hem and the relationship to the shoe, and that is really.
I mean, a lot of designers would have a real problem doing a flat shoe like that and making it look.
Yeah, you get it slightly wrong. And
really
iconic.
That's lovely. That double length.
That double length, But again,
and
it's
the very high neck.
And the very high neck. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's in this collection is really interesting is how he's using the neckline.
God, that's amazing.
Yeah, that is beautiful. I mean, it is we were talking about his sophistication earlier. I think that's really strong here for such a comparatively young designer. He's
in some ways super classic.
It is,
but
not at the same time. Yes, I mean that is. And I completely agree with what you were saying about him being edgy and a unique voice, and it's really exciting to see.
But effortlessly so.
This feels very shoppable as well, which is quite nice to see. You can imagine this on a woman of various ages, of various different kind of lifestyles.
Very easy to wear.
Yeah.
So it's like sportswear pieces, it's a mini skirt, it's a draped sweater.
That's beautiful. It reminds me a bit of some of the OG pieces as well.
That red
to be honest,
actually in some ways.
It's interesting.
And some of the black,
People said that about the Mary Katranzu collection as well on our panel. There is that element of, I think it's the proportion thing that people are playing with at the moment.
And the simplicity.
Yeah, definitely.
And the emphasis on the silhouette as well.
And Margiela as well.
Yes,
that sort of trompe l'oeil double take.
That's such a bold closing look.
And I love his neat, well-edited shows as well.
That's an amazing confidence.
Very
nice.
nice.
Yeah, like that.
I mean,
the
it's
lighting
ruthless,
and the
it's
makeup,
ruthless,
hair and
isn't it?
makeup, really beautiful.
And for somebody, as you said, that young, to be actually have the confidence to be able to cut it and bear it down.
But he worked as a window dresser, which I always think is so interesting because you see that in his work.
What a brilliant training,
because
though.
he knows exactly how to present things, exactly how to cut things down, how to style them up. You know,
I wish I'd done that.
It's brilliant.
No, honestly, I think it's an amazing thing.
Well, he was an actor and then a window dresser. You can totally see that in all of his collections. I think he just trained.
We're all actors.
I don't know if we're going to see
it.
a walkthrough.
It's all one big performance.
In many ways.
Completely.
I don't know what I just have to say. I'm actually really proud to be like British at the moment. I think London Fashion Week is just phenomenal. It's incredible. This place.
Oh,
It looks amazing.
It's
seeing it all
amazing.
together, doesn't it?
Every show that I've seen at this place has just been amazing.
But I think, you're right, there's a great confidence
Yeah.
in this season particularly.
And a great diversity. To have
Yeah.
someone like Mary Kachanzu, it's so different to what Jonathan does, but they're both, and someone like Jonathan Saunders, there's such a variation. It's really brilliant. I don't know, J.W. Anderson though definitely feels like the most exciting one. I don't know why there's something about him that is just, he's captured this moment in time, and it's just, it's a bit like Karl, you know, the model that's everywhere. He is like that.
It really captures your imagination as well.
But it feels as if he's going to be around for a while. It feels like
it does.
Just coming to fruition.
And you don't want him to go to another house. You just want him to be J.W. Anderson.
But that's why the Versus thing is so perfect. You think, what a gift for him.
But it's just like a one-season thing, isn't it?
Oh, there he is. Should we give him a clap?
Very telegenic.
I know. I think he's adorable. I love him so much. So what everyone seems to have loved it, but what's our gut to that? Is it different to what we were expecting? Is it exactly what we were expecting? What's our...
It's just so accomplished. Like all the threads that he's been working on, but just on a different platform.
I thought it was easy and slouchy, which I wasn't expecting actually. I'm so glad he did that.
And actually quite ageless.
Really
ageless. Looked at those different
It's kind of quite wise. There's something for his age and how long he's been around. He can dress any kind of woman, and that's.
Well, you could see that you could choose to wear the whole outfit, or you could select, the skirt or the top or whatever. And that again is really clever in terms of his brand, isn't it? The idea that it appeals in so many different
mother, daughter,
that's right, whatever.
Friend,
But it was more slouchy. I wasn't. It was the last ones I've seen, which I did, but with this great sort of cutting and sense of proportion.
And we haven't even got into what the fabrics were or anything.
Yeah, and you know it's going to be amazing to touch.
There's you can't even talk about it, can you? Because you just don't know what it's
there
done.
was fur bustiers and
strange
latex rubbers.
I'm excited. Lots of different really heavy wool, so that looked as if they ought to be stiff. He's actually really sculpted them.
We talked a little bit about this before we saw the show, and I do want to go back to it because I think it's a really interesting idea, which is this kind of androgyny in fashion, the way we've seen that sort of subverted and changed by this new set of, this generation of designers, because it is a very different kind of androgyny to what we've seen before. And what do you think he's doing that makes that so exciting? Because people are always like, it's the new androgyny. And what do you think they mean by that?
I think he's very thoughtful about it. You know, you can read books by Jeffrey Eugenides, which explores kind of contemporary sexuality and what it means, and sliding scales, and actually what we're evolving into as a human race. And you just feel that there's a real thought about it. It's not a sort of retro nod or
and because I think he actually thinks about people's relationships. So androgyny was explored in different ways at different times, where people are more nervous about different things. But actually, fashion is about relationships, and it's about exploring how we interact with each other, and it kind of feels effortless for him to be doing it in this way, because it feels as if it's quite a natural thing.
It does, and I think it's also of that generation where actually male, female, what does it matter? Whereas in a way, the older designers came up still with a much more conventional approach, even if they were rejecting it as to what it was to dress a woman, what it was to dress a man. Whereas I think, that's much more fluid. They've grown up with a much more fluid.
In the way that Hedi Slimane has that viewpoint as well. But I think JW's he's younger, it's a fresher one, but it still seems very authentic.
And I think maybe that's why Karl, you kept saying it's very sexy, and I think you're right, and I think maybe that is why it's so sexy, because you mentioned this idea of like a sliding scale of sexuality, and it does feel like it's more about sexuality than it is about gender sometimes.
Well, I think that a girl looking slouchy like that is much more sexy than someone in I said it again, a skin-tight cocktail dress. Doesn't interest me.
And that means that fashion's really moving on, because all the sort of reference points around celebrity and different sides of culture, he's kind of gone way beyond that. There's new kinds of reference points, I think.
And do we think he really thinks about whether it's masculine or feminine? He just gets on with it.
I think he just gets on with it.
Intuitive. It feels intuitive.
He thinks about how great people will feel wearing it.
Yeah. It doesn't feel laboured, does it, at any point?
No.
Feels like easy.
I think he's probably more laboured over, like, developing what he does, developing his technique, fabrics.
And the material of the fabrics, I would have thought the fabrics.
That
would be relevant.
Whether a boy wears a feminine thing or a girl wears a masculine thing is so irrelevant now. And it's actually quite boring to talk about it. Not with, but you know what I mean? It's like, we should actually get to a point where, and I think that's why he's so important, where we just go, that looks great on that boy, or that looks great on that woman.
And that's where fashion shapes culture, because as soon as it becomes something that you see and feels right, then it is right.
I'm interested because how this kind of genderless fashion will develop, because as you say, it does feel kind of like a tired idea, putting some slouchy suit on a woman, no one's like, oh, that's fantastic anymore, it's really normal. And I wonder how we're going to see genderless fashion.
Well, when I started in fashion, it was about, back in like, God knows when, it was like, a genderless fashion was a woman wearing a Yohji Yamamoto suit. You know what I mean?
Like, also, you had Yohji doing men in skirts like years ago.
But then that's just gender swapping fashion.
And now that feels, it's not about that. It's so much more blended.
But that's how it would seem. It was that obvious. Because that was the only way it could sort of be talked about, whereas now it's not. It is much more.
But then we've had more of a split now, because we've got the men's and then we've got the women's shows. And do you think it'd be interesting to see more unisex shows? And I think, because it's even small things that people don't consider in terms of how fashion's gendered, by things like a man's tweed being thicker than a woman's tweed. And there's, I wonder when we're going to start seeing stuff like that.
Well, I love it. Just like when a designer shows a collection, does a runway show, and it shows men's and women's silhouettes in the same show. I mean, like Helmut Lang. That was great. It was great because it kind of like, it made sense. You know what I mean?
Well, our lives have changed, and the things that we do, there isn't. Men don't need to wear a thicker tweed because they're outdoors, or lives have changed so much.
But are designers responding enough to that? Do you think?
Something like JW is.
And I think. I'm interested actually to get all your opinion. Do you think women are much more, and men are open, I think probably more women than men, are more open to buying menswear and actually wearing it really well and enjoying it?
I think so, but it's not, I don't think it's necessarily a question of buying menswear, but I think menswear is wonderful and beautiful, but I'd like a version for myself. It doesn't mean I can just put on a men's garment. It's not necessarily going to look, it has to be recut. But I love the uniform aspect of menswear.
Are we getting enough of that in women's? Because I mentioned the same thing this morning actually, but Charlie Porter wrote this really interesting thing on his blog, I think it was yesterday, saying that he was kind of criticising the London women's shows and saying, look, where is this thing where it's all about dressing up, it's all about the cocktail dress, like who are these women, who is it relevant to? And he's like, you don't see that on the men's, it is like sportswear and daywear and stuff that could translate literally straight off the runway onto the people there. And he's like, I don't see that as much with the women's wear. And he was saying maybe actually women's wear needs to catch up with menswear. And it did get me thinking about, like, why are we seeing endless cocktail dresses? Are we seeing enough of that kind of
I think
uniform?
Yes, but I think it's been quite interesting with the student shows. I mean, in fact, a lot of the students, the most experimental work has been in the menswear, because I think that everybody's got so stuck, because of the fashion industry, on this sort of small, tight cocktail dresses or whatever it is. I mean, I get sick of them. Whereas in actual fact, because of and I think it's interesting that some of the things from New York was about the layering, and I think layering is very much a sort of reference to menswear that's been creeping into, because of the idea of
and
the
more
sort of,
utility
and much more utility.
I think Richard Nicholl struck that well. Beautiful grey cashmere suiting, could really go to work. You could see it in everyday life,
But
I think it really applied itself to that.
It was amazing, that collection. It was beautiful.
So I sometimes think if you like fashion and you like sort of textiles and fabrics, then you actually don't really want to design just small dresses. You actually want to get involved with something, which in a way the JW, where you're actually playing with something which allows the sort of fabric to work with the body in a very new and innovative way. And I think that's what, for me, that's what fashion is about. Otherwise, it's about clothing.
But I do worry a little bit about that, about saying that British fashion, women's fashion is all about cocktail drinks. It really isn't.
No, it isn't.
I kind of disagree with it, to be honest. I mean, I was working behind the scenes a little bit this fashion week, but I went to shows yesterday and today, and I didn't see so many cocktail dresses. I saw quite amazing.
But there is still a focus on dressing up. You know, everything's put with a heel. That's why that was so refreshing. You know, and it is.
But it can be dressing up to go out, like Pam Hogg's show. It's about going out to a club, and it's about having a party, and then other designers, you know, Orla Keeley, I think it was, that showed in a work environment. So I think in London you see lots of different settings.
Yeah,
so
I think
it's not just
we
straight
shouldn't sell
runways.
ourselves down the road. We should be, you know, there's a massive select choice in London. There always is.
I think that's very much the case this season.
And there's the new
Even more
generation
so.
that are coming up. I find it interesting because you look at like Jonathan Saunders and Roxanne Dill and Chick and Christopher Kane, who came along at the same time, and they did really champion things like the dress and your great cocktail wear, and it's brilliant, and I love all of those, so I think they're amazing. And then you have that slightly younger generation, so you're people like Jonathan Anderson and Simone Rocha, who it's very much about, you know, uniform, and people always about both of them talk about this idea of menswear translating to women's wear and vice versa, and it's almost like that's going to be the sort of identifier of their generation. I know that sounds a bit simplistic to put it in those terms, but I think I was trying to think about why there's so much buzz around Jonathan, but also so much buzz around Simone, and I think it is, in a way, that common thread of making stuff that feels really like what women really
it's
want to wear.
different approaches. I mean, I know Simone personally very well, and she designs for herself
She's
and her
amazing,
friends,
Simone.
which is so beautiful, you know. And she understands who she wants to dress, you know.
And also understanding what's out there in the market.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
Are there too many party dresses and not enough parties?
Yeah.
Particularly where's that gap in the wardrobe? My wardrobe is certainly really.
Sometimes I need a cocktail dress, come off it, you know. But in a way, it's like someone like J.W. Anderson. I mean, it's, you know, or Jonathan, should I say? I mean, it's kind of like he's nailing it on, you know, in two ways, in a very interesting way, and therefore, you know, he's doing women's wear. He's not a woman. He doesn't wear women's clothes, but I like the way that they're married together, and I like the way it doesn't really matter. You know, I think it's really interesting, and it's hard to do a men's collection and a women's collection. It must be really difficult.
And a Topshop collection.
Which is extraordinary.
So
that is extraordinary.
Yeah.
Really
I'd like to talk a bit about that, about the pressure that you get on young designers, because I wanted to ask you about this, because I know you do work with young brands and young designers, just how to make that work, how to make your aesthetic fit into a system where you have to churn out that much stuff and constantly be going.
And I think some people, I mean, JW is an example of actually starting to tread a path that you're actually dictating yourself, instead of just thinking, I've got to work in this particular way. And some of the designers we work with are actually working in a different way and realising that can be their distinction. But yeah, it's a huge stress, but on the other hand, we all love it. And when you're really doing the thing that you really love to do, you do work really hard, you know, and it's great fulfillment from it as well, and that buzz does keep you going. So I think on the one hand, you need to be able to get that balance of being able to carve your own way and not just doing things because everybody else is telling you need to keep tramping it out. But on the other hand, there is, you know, in our industry, there's such a great passion behind what we do, and if you're doing something that you really feel you're doing well, you keep doing it.
Is it possible, because I was thinking about the way in which Jonathan sources his fabrics, you know, he is very passionate about getting things from Britain, and I was wondering, the more we see that pace increase, are those going to be the things that people let go first and think, you know, it's cheaper, a lot easier for me to get things?
I think actually, I mean, talking from experience, if you can do things closer to home, you can take more risks and you can have more fun with it, because you can be more experimental. If you're there and you can go and visit the mill, you can go and work with your machinist, you can try things out, and if it doesn't go right and it turns out in a different way, sometimes it actually turns out better. Whereas if you're doing something and you're going for 3 weeks, you've got to get the whole collection done in a factory in Italy, you don't take the risks in the same way. So actually I think bringing it closer to home, you can be more creative and you can have more fun with it.
And are you all pleased to see people like Louise Gray or Jonathan sourcing things in Britain? Do you think that's
I think it's amazing. You know, Giles is a big leader in that, working with, you know, really obscure tweed and silk mills that have really benefited from his input, because it's regenerating their skills and the business and the technicity of things. And I think more designers will come into that.
Yes.
And as a designer, you are welded to your culture, and if your culture is about a material that comes from somewhere that is related to your upbringing, it kind of has got some more resonance to it somehow. So you can identify with it. And I think that there has been problems in the past of British mills maybe having quite a narrow ability to be able to do things that aren't always as flexible as you want them to be. But I think there's a lot more leeway on all angles now, and I think there's a lot more excitement about mills working with young designers.
Yeah, cashmeres. I mean, there's a splendid array of traditional heritage fabrics.
And
tweed.
designers are almost fetishizing that heritage and that Britishness. Like that's what I like about Jonathan. We all mentioned that British element, but Simone, she's so proud of her Irish roots, and she always brings that into her collection. It's almost like it's really cool to be British, which is, and that's translated not just to an aesthetic, but to fabric as well. And I want to ask a little bit about brand building, which is taking things in a different direction, away from aesthetic and onto sort of the way in which someone like Jonathan has developed his label, because we all talked about how he's been so ambitious and worked very hard, and the ways in which you're experiencing young people trying to do a similar thing to him. Do you find that already your students are thinking about, which collaborations would I do, and would I do pre-fall, and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean they are, and also they because in the college we do everything related to fashion, so you can get designers, and they do that. They're working with stylists. They're working with photographers. They can work with visual merchandisers. They can, understand so much more about what it is for buyers and so on. So that's a huge advantage in the college, and it's certainly something that the work that Dilys has done at the centre, but also we've got the Centre for Fashion Enterprise in the college as well, and the work that it does in terms of helping designers to develop their USP. And what we've been doing is obviously feeding that back into the courses, so that because the experience that we've gained helping to nurture and develop people like Richard Nicol or Erdem and so on has really meant that we've been able to work that back in so that the students understand these issues, because it's a really delicate balance, because just as creativity and technique are really important, and so it is important to build your brand, but you don't want to have the brand building over your creativity. And that's what's exciting about what Jonathan's doing, because you have a sense that he's really experimenting. He's got this amazing sort of toy box at the moment, so he can do women's wear and men's wear, and he can do the Top Shop, and he's got Versus and all of those sorts of things, and that allows him, that experience is absolutely extraordinary. And obviously not everybody can have that, not everybody's capable of it, but they can to a certain level.
I feel like young people are so much more focused these days.
I think you have to be.
I think when I was like a student, I don't think we were aware of what
not at all.
That, it was a different time.
No, and that's what's so hard, because actually if you're not careful you get so anxious and focused on getting it to market or whatever it might be, that you actually miss the fact that it's the content as well. And I think sometimes when we compare, what's great about the American education system, they're great at doing the brands, but they haven't necessarily got anything, they don't know what they're branding. And we've had the reverse, which is being, want to be creative but not knowing how. So it's this sort of marriage between the two.
But I think in the UK colleges you do get a lot of tutors who are working in the industry at the same time. So you're learning the skills, but you're also seeing from people who have got their own collections exactly what it's like. So you you're learning firsthand, and I think maybe that's different from certainly from when you speak to students who come from overseas, where the academic institution is a rarefied place that it seems to be not in touch with industry, whereas we kind of flow between the two.
It's really interesting looking at that. It is the digital generation. It's a generation that's absolutely grown up with social media. I mean, I grew up with a fax.
It's telex, come off it.
It's good to be in good company.
I do think, and I love faxes. Very elite and exclusive now. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is actually the relationship between designer and audience has got so much closer, and being aware of what you do, how you create, and immediately knowing what impact it's got, or what feedback it's got, or what Twitter feed, or what whatever generation of ideas or comments it's taken, is fantastic. So you've almost taken out a middle level of mediation, whereas before it was designer,
stuffy
media,
old
press,
fashioned writers'
magazines,
opinions.
consumer. But now you've got like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think being able to manoeuvre and understand and enjoy that process is extraordinary.
But it makes it a difficult and kind of a scary time for fashion in some sense, because when you say you take out the middlemen, a lot of people do get lost. It's a lot easier for a designer now to communicate with their shopper directly, and actually gets to the point where people, you know, they don't mind what the critics say, you know, that if their designer is speaking to them in a way that they really like, then...
I mean, there are lots of designers who, you know, we don't necessarily, they have a really good business because they've got, you know, private clients and, you know, they have a very much a sort of bespoke service, and, you know, they're doing really well. So, I mean, it's a different sort of environment that we're operating with, lots of opportunities, if you can understand who you are and what your motivations are. And I think that's one of the things that's... And how to market that.
Yeah, you're a great communicator.
Yeah.
And he is a great... He's brilliant at that. Absolutely brilliant at making it feel really natural. I want to go back to something you said, Francis, because I was really interested by, which is how, you know, when young students come out of college and they do have these amazing support mechanisms in a sense, you know, there's things like Fashion East and New Gen, and there is that, I think people come out of college feeling that there is a possibility for them to start their own label in a way that they probably didn't before. But it's come up in the last couple of panels actually, is that scary period, you know, where the funding stops. So you've done New Gen for a couple of seasons, you've got some hype, the press are on your side, and then you're kind of on your own.
I mean, it's really
how to navigate that.
It's really, really interesting. And in fact, we've done a lot of work in the college. I've worked quite closely with Wendy Malem on looking at the funding. And you know, you can be fine. You can get your turnover to say 2 million. You know, banks, they're really happy to, you know, to sort of throw money at you and to really invest. But if you manage to build your business, you know, because some of them we've managed to get to almost to 1 million in terms of their turnover, and
amazing,
which is absolutely fantastic. But then but then there's a gap. But there's also that very early gap, and one of the things, you know, about when you've left college and how you say if you're lucky you get the New Gen and all of those sorts of things. But it's getting the banks and others to invest in you, but in a sort of controlled and sort of a regular way. Because again, one of the other problems is that if you give too much money too quickly, then people are under pressure to expand, and they can't sustain it. So I think there's an awful lot of work that could be done, you know, on the part of banks, or I think there's a huge sort of funding opportunity for people to make money. But the trouble is, in all the discussions that we've had with venture capitalists and things like that, is that obviously they want to have a surefire return, and they don't necessarily, and it's not like that, you know. So I mean, they don't understand, and that's one of the problems. And so we've sometimes spoken about, well, you need to invest in the infrastructure, so invest in things like the Centre for Sustainable Fashion in the way of helping to grow, but again, that's not necessarily going to give them the sort of return that's wanted. So there are definitely...
Is the dialogue improving between young designers and financial people?
Well, I think it's not. I think there's a lot more. I mean, the great thing, like Harriet was saying earlier, I mean, the great thing about sort of London Fashion Week at the moment is that all of these people who've got on board a sort of sense of actually this is the place to be, and actually
and you could take it
really seriously,
and on a global platform,
and you could actually make some money. If you weren't expecting really big returns really quickly. So that's where I think we've got to keep the pressure up in that sort of way as well.
And there's a lot more camaraderie, I think, between the designers. I mean, East London, they've actually, everybody's come together to create a new guild. It's the first time a guild has been created in many years. To try and speak to the council and say, look, we've all got our small businesses here. We create this community, and you're trying to get rid of us because the rents are going up. So there is a lot more people kind of speaking together.
That was quite interesting when I was in New York for a discussion, again a debate about what's happening there in Midtown and so on, and all the sort of pressures with, again, it's, I think one of, you know, you say, well, there's an issue around funding, but there's also an issue around sort of real estate, and that obviously one of the big pressures for London is that, you know, people get driven out more and more. So I mean, yes, people do want to have manufacturing here in London and get skilled machinists and have some really good produce, but of course what's happening is that, you know, you've got the real estate being bought up and people wanting to make lots of money from creating sort of swish apartments. And, and
so
that's
you don't have the studio space.
No, you don't have the studio. So I think there are
and also
a number of
when you
factors.
leave college, you've usually got quite a substantial debt.
You've got a huge debt
to pay off.
I know.
Which I don't know for your students, but you'd be thinking twice, do I just go for a job? Do I set up on my own? I mean,
it's
especially
really
since
no, it is
fashion
really, it's just very, very serious.
Yeah.
It's very serious because
Especially
we're finding
now.
that for our home, for UK students wanting to do postgraduate study, we're having to put a lot of effort. We've got a big scholarship campaign going on at the moment because they're not coming through precisely because they've got big undergraduate, and also they could spend 10,000, 15,000 on a collection. So it's a really we need to, if we're serious about London and fashion and the industry and creativity, and I'd say this just as much if you want to be a photographer.
It's so vital because it contributes so much to the economy.
It does, but we've got to sort of find different.
But it's really coming along, isn't it?
Oh, it is.
God,
There's so much
that?
opportunity.
I feel like the
5
press
years
is
ago,
so much
where were we?
amazing.
Fashion weekend.
No,
It's like completely different.
It was only 5 years ago
Honestly,
where it was
it got to
really
a point,
flat.
didn't it, Harriet, where we were just like, oh my God,
Yes.
it's
And you come
what's
back
the
from
point?
New York and
Yeah.
London would seem like a tiny dog box in the
Like a little
no, but now it's a beacon.
We've got fabulous people like Jonathan, like loads of great young designers. I mean, even slightly older ones as well. But it's so exciting.
And also having something like Tom Ford and Burberry and all the others, so you've got the full range. Exactly, the full range. And I just think we've all got to get behind it.
And also PPR investing in Christopher Kane. I mean, they haven't invested in in anything new for so much time, and it's really significant.
And I don't think Tom Ford would be showing here if it wasn't for people like Christopher and Jonathan. Like, I think it's about that. I think it's about.
They laid the foundation.
It's cool. It's cool.
Yeah,
it is.
Honestly.
But the great thing is it all is
agree.
self-perpetuating. So now the buzz is really strong. So it's all come together.
Yeah.
That's a really lovely note to end on because that's so positive. We're all so proud of London.
Go London!
Well, should we give Jonathan and London another clap?
We love you, Jonathan.
Definitely.